Hi, my name is Volodymyr and I am a CEO of a software development company named NerdSlab. We specialize in a startup building and a growing new and young businesses. Hi everyone. So today I want to talk about one specific topic and it's project migration from one company to another, from one team to another. The reason why I've decided to talk about that is because recently we had one of these processes going from company A to our company, and it was fairly one of the most painful things we've ever had, just because how messy everything were. That's why I don't want you to be in the same situation as one of our customers, and I want to give all the advices and possible cases in advance, so to prevent any issues on your side. The first and most common cases that we receive from our customers is the poor service that vendor A provide to them. Therefore, they try to find a better solution, a better vendor, and it ends up in transferring all the materials and knowledge from one company to another. Additionally, there are other cases. It can be mergers of different companies where you are merging with another company, you are forced using their vendors. It can be selling the business, selling the part of the business that will require you to move to another vendor. It can be the specific need of an investor who requires working with another company, and again it will be required to go to another vendor, but it's all based on the circumstances that somebody else preferred or requires to work with other company. But I want to focus mostly on the case number one, just because it will be the most frequent case for startups, and that's the things we are working the most, and I think I can give a really valuable advices for you. The first and the most important part that most of our customers who migrated from other companies don't know or don't care until it's too late is an ownership. You need to understand that as a owner of a business, you should have a full ownership of any service, any responsibility, any supplier that's on a production mode. For example, you need to own a code base. It should be fully on your GitHub. You need to own design. You need to own a root access to your AWS account with permissions to host services. You need to own production level access to Stripe or other services that's used inside the application. So it means that at the time you decided to pull a trigger and cut off another company, you should have a zero dependency on them. All you do is simply delete their accesses to different platforms, and that's it. And to be honest, it can sound very silly, but this is a huge problem for most of our customers. At some point they don't care that where the code is hosted. Same with the services. You start migrating push notifications services from Firebase, and then we figure out that our customer is not an owner of this account. The owner is another company, and it means we need to reset up fully push notification accesses from scratch. So how silly it can be sounding, but it's really a problem that exists in the current world when you are trying to rush the features, but you don't care about the ownership of the tools, and end up in the spot where some accesses is not on your side, but on the side of a vendor, which is completely incorrect. So elaborating further on this theme, how to ensure that you have these accesses on your side. You need to force your current vendor to provide the list of all services your company is using. After that, you need to ensure that these all services is registered based on your company email address. Usually I recommend for my customers to use one email address for all the development services. You can create an email inbox development with you like gmail.com or your specific domain and register all services there. It will guarantee that you know what is the root account and where everything is hosted. Unfortunately, it's not 100% guaranteed that they are not using some specific service under a shell which will broke up the system if they will cut it off and they will have root accesses. But at least if you will have this measurement in the beginning, 95% of all responsibilities and all the access will be managed by you and by your root accounts. Another thing that I see fairly rare in again a startup area, just because how volatile everything is and how fast everybody tries to move, is the documentation. Unfortunately, the team who will try to occupy a place of a new vendor will have a big problem understanding what exactly is going on without the documentation, because they won't get why exactly this decision, why it's made in a code. Is it a mistake? Is this code even used, or this is a specific business case? And then it will end up constantly pinging a stakeholder or a guy who has the knowledge, trying to understand why exactly this was made and not this, and so on. So therefore, at some point, you will need to start establishing documentation inside of your project. I'm talking about business documentation, business flows. Additionally to the business documentation, you also need to have a technical documentation, so a new vendor will understand what is the process to roll out the new functionalities, what is the deployment pipeline, and so on. If they won't get it, there is a high probability that during the rollout of a new features, they may miss some important process and it will fail the whole system. Unfortunately, they cannot read your mind or cannot read the mind of the previous vendor, what exactly they planned. Therefore, if they don't get any instructions how to behave with the current ecosystem, it may end up poorly. That's why try to think in advance and force the current vendor to create the documentation on what you already have, including business and the technical documentation, and establish a process in which each new functionality you are developing firstly is documented and only after that is developed. It's a good habit to have that you are starting the feature only after the documentation was prepared. And lastly, what is very efficient but not always happening, just because not all collaboration ends up on a positive note, is two-side meeting between new vendor and old vendor, during which they can establish touch points, try to figure out what is the current system working with, how it's hosted, what is the specifics, some edge cases that they need to know, etc. After that, it will give a better picture because they will be communicating more on a technical language than on a business language directly, not through the third-party guy. And as a result, we can enclose some specifics that may not be documented, find new ways to work just because the old team may not know them. It's good to have. So if there is such a possibility, do not hesitate to connect both of them together. If you ended up in the spot that it looks like you don't have any zero documentation, you don't have no ownership of a code base, design / any other services that's used inside of the application, like you are in a pretty bad spot. You will need to start moving all of that to a personal account. Therefore, from one side, some companies have such a functionality as a migration. For example, if iOS and Android mobile application were hosted on their Google and Apple account, you can request them to migrate it to your Google and Apple account, and it will be fairly easy and fast, so it's not a big harm. So that's why before trying to re-establish everything from scratch, figure out if there is such a possibility of a migration. It can be not always found in an internet, but you can find the answers always in a support chat. If it's unfortunate and the service doesn't have any sort of a migration process from account A to account B, it means that you will need to fully re-establish this service. You will need to register your account and connect new keys or new logic to the code base. To do that, you will need to identify firstly all the services that require to be migrated, and after that reconnect them one by one. Please be wise about migration, because it may require some user to force update the application, and as they won't be able to use the previous version of the app. If the previous vendor is not answering or is not willing to help and migrate the ownership of some tools on your side, you can always go in a legal way, because usually all the contracts companies are signing inherits a full intellectual ownership, which will mean that they are forced to transfer it to you. Take it as a last measure, because it's always better to figure out everything in a peaceful way rather than start a fight. But you need to know that you are equipped with this weapon and you can use them in case it's necessary. So starting from the previous part that we mentioned, yes, documentation, really great to have. Business documentation, technical documentation, API documentation, any documentation that may be on a place is good to have. After that, you should also always have on your side a code base, which should be pushed to some Git repository. It can be GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, I'm not sure, the different services, they are all the same, but somewhere it should be, and it should be owned by your company. Then you should also have UI UX files, Figma, Sketch, Adobe, even, I'm not sure, handwritten PDF, anything, but there should be some sort of a design that should be transferred under a new company. Also, you need to have access to hosting services. If you are developing a website or your application has a backend, it should be hosted remotely. It can be AWS, it can be Google Cloud, Azure, or Heroku. There are many hosting services, and you should have a root access to this service. And after you migrate, you will need to share also accesses to a new vendor. Alongside, you will need to have a guidelines of application maintenance. So it can be correlevant to the documentation part, but it's kind of different because it describes what is the way of deploying the application, what is the way of developing specific features, and what is the way of running tests, etc. So it's some specific explanations of how to behave and how to work around the app that make the overall process correct and not break anything. Usually, if you're migrating from the bad experience, they won't have it, because usually they don't have any process at all. That's why if this process is corrupted, badly developed, it may be further enhanced, but understanding what was lying underneath before the new vendor went in is really valuable. And lastly, I will name several services that you can be using. It's fairly popular solutions in the world, and bunch of apps usually take them on board. So for example, for payments it may be a Stripe, it can be Authorize.net, it can be WorldPay or Braintree. Push notifications usually used Firebase. Firebase can be used also for messaging, for tracking crashes, performance tracking, so it's all-around tool. And if your app uses it, especially if it's mobile, most probably it is, you should take care of that. It can be, for example, Sendbird, Twilio, Agora for messaging. It can be Twilio for SMS sending. It can be Agora and Twilio for video calls and video meetings. For code tools, it can be Sentry. This is a specific error measuring tool for web and backend projects. Can also be used Snyk for tracking vulnerabilities of your application. For development of API, it can be used Swagger or Postman, and so on. So as you see, there are a bunch of tools that usually goes within the project that can also be hidden for you as an end customer, because most of the time developers will try to use something ready in the market rather than inviting bicycle and spending a bunch of time, and you may not acknowledge that. Therefore, try to always take an ownership of the code, try to take ownership of all of the tools, and in this case you will simply pull a trigger and the old vendor will stop working and the new vendor will start in an easy and smooth way. I hope you will never end in a situation when you want to change a vendor to another one. But if you will end up there, you need to have a plan on board, you need to have a full ownership, and you need to be ready to pull a trigger. So the better you prepare now, the smoother it will be later on, and the more pain you will have. Like the kind of hours that we spent nearly a month trying to figure out how to get to a previous vendor. It could be done in 2 or 3 days, which is significantly less time needed. I hope it was really valuable information and help you prevent unnecessary cases. Next time we'll try to talk about team augmentation process, the process in which you are extending the team you're currently having with new talent based on their specific experience. It's widely used and very popular model in current world, and the popularity is growing rapidly. Therefore, do not miss the opportunity to hear how exactly you need to do that and what's the pros and cons of this solution. Thanks for watching. We'll be filming more videos about startups, about their history, what tools you can use, how to evolve that, the possible mistakes, and anything that may be interesting for our audience. Feel free to write a comment what you're really interested, so we can pick the topics that bother you the most and elaborate on that. Thank you, and see you next time.